species, planets, and civilizations. But despite the beauty and wonder that space held, there were also those who suffered. The Toveri were one such species. They had once been a proud and prosperous race, known throughout the stars for their intelligence and innovation. But now their homeworld was dying, and they were slowly being forgotten. The Toveri had never asked for much. They had always been peaceful, focused on knowledge and progress, and had helped many other civilizations rise to power. However, their kindness had become their curse. As time passed, some of the more powerful races in the galaxy began to see the Toveri as weak and insignificant. Their peaceful ways were seen as a disadvantage in a universe where strength and dominance ruled. The Toveri, once proud allies, were now shunned by the galaxy. Their homeworld, Tovar Prime, was a beautiful planet covered in lush forests, tall mountains, and sparkling oceans. But now it was a shadow of its former self. A mysterious and deadly plague had struck the Toveri, decimating their population. Scientists and healers worked tirelessly to find a cure, but nothing seemed to work. The disease spread quickly, leaving the Toveri weak and desperate. As the plague worsened, the Toveri sent out distress signals, hoping for help from their allies in the galaxy. But their cries went unanswered. The Galactic Council, a group of the most powerful species in the universe, had long abandoned them. They considered the Toveri a lost cause, a species too weak to save. The Toveri had always been seen as harmless and insignificant, and now they were being left to perish in isolation. But one signal, one desperate plea, was different. It was a call to Earth. Captain Elias Voss, a leader in the United Earth Expeditionary Fleet, received the message one quiet evening in his command room aboard the Endurance. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Earth had no formal alliances with the Toveri, and their civilization was barely known outside of certain academic circles. Yet something about the message felt urgent, real, and heart-wrenching. Captain Voss was a man of principles, someone who believed in doing what was right, no matter the odds. He looked at the message again, studying the coordinates. It wasn't far. Just a few weeks' journey through the uncharted regions of space. There was a risk, of course. But what if this wasn't just some mistake? What if the Toveri needed help? After consulting with his crew and superiors, Voss made a bold decision. Despite warnings from the Galactic Council, who advised him to avoid contact with the Toveri, seeing them as too weak and unworthy of aid, he prepared the Endurance for a rescue mission. The crew was uncertain, but they trusted their captain's judgment. The Endurance set course for Tovar Prime, and as they traveled through space, the crew couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and concern. What would they find when they arrived? Would the Toveri be beyond help? Or could humanity be their last hope? Meanwhile, on Tovar Prime, things were growing darker. The Toveri had already lost most of their cities to the plague, and their once thriving population had dwindled to a few scattered groups. Their leaders were desperate, but they had lost faith in any help ever coming. The Galactic Council had turned their backs, and the other species of the galaxy had no interest in intervening. The Toveri were alone, left to face their fate. And yet, despite the hopelessness, there was a small glimmer of hope. The Toveri leaders received the signal from Earth, and while they were doubtful, a small part of them couldn't help but wonder. Could humans truly help them? Could humanity be different from the rest of the galaxy? As Captain Voss and his crew neared Tovar Prime, the question remained. Could humanity, the species known for its determination and resilience, help the Toveri stand again? Or would they, too, become another forgotten civilization in the vast, cold expanse of space? The answer would come soon. As the Endurance drew closer to Tovar Prime, the crew braced themselves for what awaited them. The planet appeared as a dark shadow against the backdrop of the stars, its surface marred by destruction. No signs of life were visible from orbit, and the once beautiful landscapes were now filled with eerie silence. The Toveri's homeworld had been ravaged, and the Endurance was humanity's last hope. Captain Elias Voss stood on the bridge, staring at the planet through the viewing window. His mind was heavy with thoughts of what they might find. Was it already too late? He had led many missions before, but this was different. They weren't just going to explore or collect data. They were going to rescue a dying species, one that the galaxy had already written off. The galaxy was vast, full of countless species. "Captain, we're entering the atmosphere now," said Lieutenant Harper, a young officer at the controls. She turned to Voss, her face a mix of determination and worry. No signs of hostile ships or interference. "It's all clear." Voss nodded. "Good. Let's make sure we're prepared for anything. This mission isn't just about rescuing the Tovari. It's about showing the galaxy that humanity still believes in doing what's right." As they descended into the atmosphere, the crew could see the extent of the damage. Tovar Prime's once vibrant cities were now ruins, with crumbling buildings and abandoned streets. The air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of decay lingered. There were no signs of the Tovari's once thriving society. No bustling marketplaces, no happy crowds, just silence. The ship touched down on the surface near the ruins of a large city. The landing gear sank slightly into the dirt, and the crew disembarked in their protective suits. They were met with the cold winds of a dying world, and every step they took seemed to echo with the weight of the mission. This was not going to be easy. A small group of Tovari emerged from the shadows, their figures thin and frail. Their once colorful skin had paled, and their faces were marked by exhaustion and fear. The plague had ravaged them, taking not only their health but also their hope. The Tovari had lost everything: friends, family, their very way of life. Now only a few remained, scattered and hiding in the ruins. The leader of the group, a Tovari elder named Isak, approached Captain Voss. His movements were slow, and his eyes held a deep sadness. The Tovari had once been a proud species, but now they were nothing more than survivors. The elder spoke softly, his voice heavy with the weight of his people's suffering. "You came," Isak said, his voice filled with disbelief. "But why? The galaxy has abandoned us. We are nothing." Captain Voss looked at him, his gaze unwavering. "You're wrong. You are not nothing. We came because we believe in you. We believe you deserve another chance." Isak shook his head, his eyes filled with doubt. "You don't understand. We are broken. Our world is dying. The plague. It's already too late." Voss placed a hand on Isak's shoulder, offering a comforting gesture. "It's never too late. We have the resources and the knowledge to help you. Together, we can save your people." Isak hesitated, his eyes searching Voss's face for any sign of false hope. But all he saw was sincerity. After a long pause, the elder finally nodded. "If you truly believe there is a chance, then we will follow you." The crew quickly set up a temporary base near the Tovari's camp. Medics, engineers, and scientists began to work, organizing their efforts into a coordinated rescue mission. The doctors immediately started treating the sick and injured, using advanced medical equipment to halt the progress of the plague. But it was clear that the Tovari needed more than just medicine. They needed hope. The engineers and technicians began working on the remaining Tovari technology, hoping to restore some of their old systems to help rebuild the planet. They knew it would take time, but they were determined to help. The Tovari, although weak and fragile, began to show signs of life. They helped where they could, offering their knowledge of the planet's terrain and resources. Over the next few days, the humans and Tovari worked side by side. It wasn't easy. The Tovari were still grieving their losses, and many had doubts that they could ever recover. But the humans were patient, offering encouragement and pushing forward despite the challenges. Slowly but surely, the bond between the two species began to grow. As Voss stood outside the temporary camp one evening, looking at the stars above, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. They weren't just here to save the Tovari. They were here to show the galaxy that even in the darkest times, humanity would stand by those in need. The Endurance had come to a forsaken world, but it wouldn't leave until the Toveri had the chance to rise again. "Captain," Lieutenant Harper said, walking up beside him, "we're making progress. The Toveri are beginning to trust us." Voss smiled, though it was faint. "We're not done yet, but we'll make it through. Together." The night was quiet, but the stars above seemed brighter. The rescue mission had only just begun, and the road ahead would be difficult. But humanity had made its choice. They wouldn't turn their backs on a species in need, and in return, the Toveri might just have a future after all. As the days passed, Captain Elias Voss and the crew of the Endurance continued their efforts to help the Toveri. The once bustling city they had landed near had become a temporary hub of cooperation, with humans and Toveri working side by side. Despite the progress, it was clear that the task before them was immense. The Toveri's wounds ran deep, and not just physically. Elder Isaac, though hopeful, still carried the heavy burden of his people's despair. Each day, he saw the suffering, the loss, and the fear in his people's eyes. They had lost so much, and even with the humans' help, the scars of the past seemed impossible to heal. As the Endurance's medical teams worked tirelessly to treat the Toveri, they encountered many complications. The plague, though slowed by the treatments, had already taken a toll on the survivors. Many were weak, unable to help rebuild their cities or restore their broken way of life. It was clear that medicine alone wouldn't be enough. What the Toveri needed most was hope. Hope that they could rebuild, hope that they could survive. Captain Voss understood this better than anyone. In the face of such destruction, it wasn't enough to simply fix the body. They needed to repair the spirit. That's why he decided to do something no one expected. He would help the Toveri reclaim the pieces of their past. The Endurance would not just be a symbol of rescue, it would be a symbol of a future. "Elder Isaac," Voss said one morning, pulling him aside near the makeshift camp, "I've been thinking. Your people have incredible knowledge, skills, and history. If we help you bring back your old systems, your power, your networks, perhaps that's the key to giving the Toveri something more than survival. You need to remember who you are." Isaac looked at Voss, his face somber. "You think it's possible to rebuild everything?" Voss nodded. "I think if we work together, anything is possible. You've survived this far, haven't you?" Isaac's eyes softened. "I had thought we were beyond saving. But perhaps you are right." With the new plan in place, the humans began working closely with the Toveri engineers. The ruins of Tovar Prime were filled with valuable technology, but much of it had been destroyed or was now useless. However, there were still parts that could be salvaged: power generators, communication hubs, and old mining equipment. If they could just get these systems back online, the Toveri could begin rebuilding their cities, their homes. The task was difficult, and progress was slow. The Toveri engineers had not worked with this kind of human technology before, and the humans were learning the ins and outs of Toveri machinery. Despite the language barrier and the occasional misunderstandings, the teamwork began to flourish. For every problem, there was a solution, and each success, no matter how small, was celebrated. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the crew gathered around a small campfire outside the base. The mood was lighter than it had been in days. For the first time, the Toveri shared stories of their past, stories of peace, of innovation, of a world full of life. They spoke of the old cities, the grand libraries, and the beautiful gardens that once dotted Tovar Prime. They told stories of great minds and great leaders, of the Toveri reaching out to the stars to share their knowledge. Elder Isaac spoke for the group. "We were once a proud people. We shared our knowledge with the galaxy, helped others rise to their full potential. But we became too trusting. We relied on others, and when we needed help most, they turned their backs on us." Captain Voss sat quietly, listening. "You shouldn't have been alone. No one should have abandoned you." Isaac's gaze softened. "You are different, Captain. Your people, they still believe in something beyond themselves. You didn't turn your back when the rest of the galaxy did. Voss nodded slowly. That's because humanity understands what it means to stand together. When one of us falls, we all fall. And when one of us rises, we all rise. The bond between the Toveri and the humans was growing stronger, not just out of necessity, but out of mutual respect. The Toveri saw in humanity a resilience they had once known in themselves, and humanity saw in the Toveri the strength to rebuild, no matter the odds. Over the next few weeks, the Endurance crew and the Toveri worked around the clock, bringing the old systems back online. The power grids, once dark, now hummed with life. The communication towers crackled with static before sending signals to the far reaches of space, reminding the galaxy that the Toveri were not gone. Slowly but surely, the Toveri began to reclaim their world. It wasn't much, but it was enough. One day, Elder Isak stood before Captain Voss, a rare smile on his face. We have something to show you. It's small, but it's a start. He waved for Voss to follow him to the central square of the ruined city. There, standing tall against the sky, was a single tower, a remnant of the old Toveri architecture. The lights on it flickered to life, casting a warm glow across the plaza. It's not much, Isak said, his voice thick with emotion, but it is the beginning of something new. Voss smiled. It's more than enough. The Toveri were no longer just survivors. They were beginning to rebuild, to remember who they were, and with humanity's help, they would rise again. The Endurance had now been on Tovar Prime for nearly 2 months. The small steps they had taken together with the Toveri were beginning to show real progress. New power was flowing through the city, communication systems were reactivated, and the Toveri's health was slowly improving thanks to the humans' medical efforts. But the true victory lay in the spirit of the Toveri people. They were beginning to believe that they could rebuild, that they could once again stand tall. Captain Elias Voss stood on the edge of the camp, gazing out at the remnants of the ruined city. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of dust and metal. The Toveri had made great strides, but the road ahead was still long and uncertain. It would take years, perhaps decades, to restore their world to what it once was. But for the first time, there was hope, a flicker that couldn't be extinguished. Voss was joined by Elder Isak, who had become not just a leader to his people, but a friend to the humans. Despite his age and the weight of the suffering his people had endured, there was a strength in his eyes that was hard to ignore. He had lived through so much, yet still, he continued to fight for a future. You've given us a chance, Captain, Isak said quietly, his voice reflecting both gratitude and sorrow. Before you came, I had all but given up hope. But now I can see it again. The possibility of a future. Voss nodded. It wasn't just me. It's all of us, your people and mine. We're in this together. Over the past weeks, the Toveri had begun to trust the humans more, and the humans had come to understand the Toveri better. They had learned that the Toveri were a people of great intelligence and heart, capable of innovation and resilience. The destruction they had faced had not diminished their ability to adapt. If anything, it had made them more determined to survive. One afternoon, as the engineers worked to restore the last of the city's vital systems, a loud noise echoed through the air. A distant rumble reverberated across the ground, drawing the attention of everyone in the camp. The workers paused, looking toward the horizon. What was that? Lieutenant Harper asked, her hand on her communicator. Voss tensed. I don't know, but we need to be cautious. That sound came from the direction of the old mining district. Harper turned to the crew. Prepare for a possible threat. Let's move out. The group quickly gathered their gear, heading toward the source of the noise. The old mining district was once a thriving area of Tovar Prime, rich with minerals and natural resources, but it had been abandoned for years after the Toveri's downfall. Now, it was a dark, desolate place. As they approached the district, they could see smoke rising from a cluster of buildings in the distance. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and dust. A low growl of machinery echoed through the streets, and the crew's hands instinctively went to their weapons. "What is it?" Voss muttered under his breath, his gaze scanning the area. As they neared the source of the smoke, they found a group of Tovari scavengers, frantically working to salvage parts from the destroyed machinery. But there was something odd about them. Their movements were erratic, their faces filled with panic. They were trying to repair something. Something big. "Stop!" Voss called out, raising a hand. "What's going on here?" One of the Tovari, a younger male, turned around in shock. His eyes were wide, filled with a mix of fear and desperation. We didn't mean to cause trouble, but we need to get it working again. If we don't..." His voice trailed off as a loud thrum of energy filled the air. A large machine, one that appeared to be a massive drill, suddenly roared to life, sending vibrations through the ground. It was an ancient piece of equipment, something that had been buried for years, but now it was functional again. The Tovari had somehow managed to restore it to life. "We didn't mean to. We only wanted to help rebuild the city, but the Tovari continued, his voice shaking with fear. Elder Isak stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "It's all right. We'll handle this." He turned to Voss. "This drill is one of our most powerful tools, but it's unstable. We used it for mining, but if it isn't carefully controlled, it could destroy what little is left of the city." Voss nodded. "We'll shut it down. Stand back." The team carefully approached the machine, trying to cut the power before it caused further damage. Voss could feel the tension in the air. This wasn't just about saving the city. It was about showing the Tovari that they could still control their future, that they could rebuild with intention and care. After a few tense moments, they successfully powered down the machine, and the rumbling stopped. The air grew still, and the smoke began to dissipate. The immediate danger was over. Elder Isak let out a deep sigh of relief. "Thank you, Captain. I can't say how many times we've nearly made the same mistake, trying to force things back to what they were, instead of taking the time to rebuild properly." Voss gave a small smile. "That's what we're here for. We're not just fixing machines. We're helping you build a future, one step at a time." The Tovari scavengers, still shaken but grateful, nodded in agreement. They had learned a valuable lesson. Not all of the past could be restored at once. It would take time, care, and patience to bring their world back to life. As the team made their way back to camp, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city's ruins. Despite the challenges, the Tovari were beginning to understand. It wasn't about rushing to fix everything at once. It was about rebuilding carefully, thoughtfully. And with each small victory, they were moving closer to a new beginning. It had been several more weeks since the incident at the mining district. The Tovari had been working closely with the humans, rebuilding what they had lost. The city's infrastructure was slowly improving, and the people were becoming more confident. They began to realize that they could still have a future they could shape with their own hands. Captain Elias Voss was sitting in the command center of the Endurance, the humans' flagship, staring at the holographic map of Tovar Prime. The map showed areas of the city where progress had been made, but there were still many places that needed work. Despite the improvements, there was a sense that something important was still missing, something that could change the course of their efforts. "I can feel the shift," Voss muttered to himself, rubbing his chin. "We're getting close to something big. I just hope we're ready." Lieutenant Harper entered the room, carrying a stack of reports. She had been working tirelessly to support the rebuilding efforts on the ground. "Captain, we've received some new intel. There's a group of Tovari who've discovered something strange." Voss raised an eyebrow. "Strange? What do you mean?" "They found an old facility, buried deep beneath the surface of the city. It looks like a research station of some kind. They've started investigating it, but they're not sure if it's safe to enter yet." "A research station," Voss repeated, his interest piqued. "Could it be one of their old projects?" Harper nodded. "It's possible." The Taveri have always been ahead of the curve when it comes to technology. If they've left something behind, it could be the key to everything. We need to check it out. Voss stood up, his gaze focused. All right, we'll take a team and head out. If it's dangerous, we'll pull back. But if there's something that can help us, something that could give the Taveri the edge, they deserve to know about it. Hours later, the team arrived at the site. It was a vast, underground complex, hidden beneath the rubble of what used to be the center of Tovar Prime. The entrance was sealed, but after some effort, the Taveri engineers managed to cut through the thick metal doors. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped, and the air felt heavier, as if the very walls held secrets from a forgotten time. The room they entered was vast and dimly lit, but the signs of advanced technology were immediately clear. The walls were lined with strange devices and glowing panels. The Taveri and human engineers moved cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of danger. The air was thick with the smell of old metal and dust, as though no one had stepped foot in this place for centuries. "I've never seen anything like this before," Harper said, her voice filled with awe as she examined one of the glowing panels. "This is far beyond anything we've encountered." One of the Taveri engineers, a young female named Lyra, approached a control panel at the far end of the room. Her hand shook as she studied the alien technology. This could be a breakthrough. These systems are beyond anything we've rebuilt so far. If we can access them, it could give us the power we need to fully restore our world. Voss stepped forward, his expression serious. "Let's be cautious. We don't know what's inside these systems. We need to make sure it's safe." Lyra nodded, and with a deep breath, began to work on the control panel. The room filled with the sound of her fingers tapping against the interface, each movement careful and deliberate. After a few moments, the system hummed to life, and a bright light filled the room. The walls around them seemed to shift, revealing a large screen that displayed data, graphs, charts, and blueprints for advanced machinery. This is a map," Lyra whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "A map of the entire planet. An archive of our world before the war. There's data on power systems, resources, and technology we thought was lost." The team gathered around, staring at the holographic display in awe. It wasn't just a map. It was a treasure trove of knowledge. Information that could bring Tovar Prime back from the brink of extinction. They could rebuild not only the city but also their society, their culture, their very way of life. "This could change everything," Voss said quietly, his voice filled with awe and hope. "If we can access this data, we can rebuild faster, smarter. We can make Tovar Prime even better than it was." Lyra turned to Voss, her face filled with excitement. "Captain, if we can figure out how to integrate this technology into our current systems, we could restore our planet's power grid. We could even make our cities self-sustaining again." Voss smiled for the first time in weeks. "Then let's get to work." As the team worked tirelessly through the night, the information on the screen began to take shape. It was clear now. This facility held the key to Tovar Prime's survival. The Taveri had once been a thriving civilization, rich with resources and knowledge. With this technology, they could restore their power, rebuild their cities, and reclaim their place in the galaxy. For the first time, the Taveri truly believed that they had a future where they weren't just survivors, but creators. They had been knocked down, but with the help of their new human allies, they were rising again. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: the Taveri were no longer alone. They had the help they needed to rebuild. Together, humans and Taveri would forge a new path, one where both races would rise, united by the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The weeks that followed the discovery of the ancient facility were some of the busiest the Taveri had ever experienced. With the new technology from the underground research station, there was a new sense of purpose among the people. They worked day and night, combining their knowledge with the advanced systems they had uncovered. The humans, led by Captain Voss, had stayed by their side, helping where they could, but it was the Tovari who took the lead. They had been given a second chance, and they weren't going to waste it. Lyra, the young engineer who had first accessed the systems, became the bridge between the two species. She led the team of both Tovari and humans who worked to integrate the new technologies into their old systems. They'd made remarkable progress. Power grids were restored, new resource systems were activated, and even the city's once collapsed communication network began to hum with life again. Captain Voss had never been so proud of the Tovari. Watching them rebuild what had been lost felt like a small victory for humanity as well. They weren't just helping. They were learning from each other, evolving together. For the first time, the two species were not merely allies in a desperate fight for survival. They were co-creators of a new future. But as the city slowly came back to life, there was an undercurrent of unease. The Tovari knew they were being watched. The Galactic Union, the very same organization that had abandoned them during their darkest hour, hadn't forgotten about the Tovari's sudden rise from the ashes. The Tovari had always been seen as weak, a conquered species that no longer posed a threat. But with this new power and knowledge, they were becoming something much different. Voss had no illusions. The Galactic Union would not sit idly by while a formerly beaten race regained its strength, and that realization weighed heavily on his mind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Voss stood on the observation deck of the Endurance, staring out at the city below. The streets were bustling with life again, Tovari and human workers alike, all contributing to the restoration of the planet. But beneath the surface, he knew trouble was brewing. Lieutenant Harper joined him, sensing his tension. "What's on your mind, Captain?" she asked, her voice calm. Voss sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I can feel it. Something's coming. The Union won't be happy about this. They'll try to stop us, and they won't hesitate to use force if they have to." Harper looked out at the city too, her eyes narrowing. "Do you think they'll come here? To Tovar Prime?" "It's not a matter of if," Voss replied grimly. "It's when." Harper nodded, understanding the weight of his words. The Galactic Union had always been a powerful entity. They had fleets at their disposal, and they wouldn't tolerate any race rising against them. Tovar Prime had been abandoned, yes, but the Union had never fully given up on controlling the galaxy. The Tovari's newfound strength was a direct challenge to that control. As if on cue, a flashing red light on the wall near the door blinked on. Voss turned toward it sharply. It was a message from the Endurance's communications officer. "Captain Voss," the officer's voice crackled through the intercom. "We've just intercepted a transmission. The Galactic Union fleet is on its way." Voss's heart sank. He had hoped to delay this moment for as long as possible, but it seemed the Union had already set its sights on Tovar Prime. "Get me the Tovari leadership," Voss ordered, his voice firm. In the war room, the Tovari leaders had gathered, their faces filled with worry. Voss could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the fear of what might come next. Lyra stood at the head of the table, her hands clasped tightly together. "Do you think they'll attack?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm afraid it's possible," Voss said. "The Galactic Union has always seen Tovar Prime as a lost cause. They won't take kindly to our recovery. We've been preparing for something like this, but we need to be ready for anything." The room fell silent as the weight of the situation set in. It was clear now. There would be no peaceful negotiations. The Galactic Union was coming to stop the Tovari, to put an end to their rise. The Tovari had survived a war, a deadly betrayal, and now they faced the threat of another war, this time with humanity by their side. Voss stood, looking at each of the Tovari leaders. "We will not back down. You've already proven that you have the strength to survive. Now we need to show the Galactic Union that we will fight for our right to exist." The room erupted in murmurs, but Lyra stood tall, her expression determined. "We have the technology, the knowledge. We can stand against them. Together." Voss nodded. Together. As the news spread across Tovar Prime, the people began to prepare. They didn't have the might of the Union, but they had something more. Resolve. They would fight not just for their planet, but for the chance to live freely, without the chains of a corrupt system controlling their every move. Voss looked out at the gathering storm in the distance. The Union fleet was coming, but the Tovari would not bow. They would stand firm, and they would show the galaxy that the Tovari were not a race to be discarded or forgotten. They were a force to be reckoned with, and with humanity at their side, the galaxy would soon learn to respect them once again. The morning light broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over Tovar Prime. However, the peace was fleeting. The air was thick with tension. Every Tovari, every human, and every worker knew what was coming. The Galactic Union fleet was only hours away, its enormous warships cutting through space like dark shadows. It was time to face the storm. Captain Voss stood on the bridge of the Endurance, his hands gripping the rail as he stared out at the vast expanse of space. The crew was silent, each member preparing for the battle that could decide the future of Tovar Prime. The Tovari had made their stand. The humans had pledged their support. Now, all they had to do was hold their ground. Voss turned toward Lieutenant Harper, who stood by the command console. Her face was grim, but her eyes were steady. She knew what was at stake. "Any word from the fleet?" Voss asked. "Still incoming, Captain. The first wave will be here in less than 2 hours," Harper replied, her voice calm but laced with concern. Voss nodded, his mind racing. They had to be ready. The Tovari were not soldiers by nature, but they were fighters. They had the will, the courage, and the technology. What they lacked in experience, they made up for in determination. And the humans, though few in number, stood with them. They would face this challenge together. On the surface of Tovar Prime, the preparations were already underway. The Tovari had spent weeks fortifying their cities, using the advanced technology from the underground facility. They had activated defense systems, erected shields, and built makeshift fortifications around the major cities. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Lyra, the young engineer who had helped lead the recovery of their technology, now found herself at the heart of the defense effort. She stood beside a group of Tovari soldiers, overseeing the activation of a new energy shield that would protect the city of Tovaris. The Tovari had learned quickly, and they worked tirelessly to ensure that their defenses were ready for the fight. "We'll hold them off," Lyra said, her voice full of determination. "We have the technology, we have the will, and we have the humans by our side." The soldiers nodded, their faces set in grim determination. They knew the odds. They knew they weren't a match for the full might of the Galactic Union. But they also knew they had something the Union didn't: hope. As the first wave of the Galactic Union fleet arrived in orbit above Tovar Prime, the people below gathered in silence. They had no illusions about the battle ahead, but there was a quiet confidence in the air. They were not alone. Humanity had joined their cause, and together, they were ready to make their stand. The Union fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, their massive ships filling the sky. Hundreds of ships, all armed to the teeth, hovered above the planet. The Tovari and humans watched as the Union's lead ship, the Indomitable, descended from the fleet. It was a symbol of the Union's power, a floating fortress. But as the Indomitable prepared to fire its first volley, something unexpected happened. A signal blinked on the communication console of the Endurance. It was a transmission from the Tovari leadership. "This is General Selar." The Tovari leader's voice crackled through the comms. "The time for diplomacy is over. We will not yield." Voss's heart swelled with pride. He knew the Tovari had found their voice. They would not be cowed into submission any longer. On the ground, the battle began. The Union ships fired their first barrage, sending blasts of energy toward the surface. But the Tovari's newly activated shields held strong. The explosion sent shockwaves through the cities, but the defenses held, giving the Tovari and their human allies the time they needed. Captain Voss watched as the Union fleet began to deploy troops, landing on the planet's surface. He knew they would try to take Tovar Prime by force. But he was ready. "Launch all fighters," Voss ordered. "Let's show them what we're made of." In the skies above Tovar Prime, the Tovari and human pilots took to their ships, joining forces to defend their home. The Tovari ships, though smaller and less advanced than the Union's, were agile and fast. The humans had trained their pilots to be sharp, and they worked together, covering each other's backs as they launched an all-out assault on the invading fleet. The battle raged for hours, with explosions lighting up the sky. The Tovari and human forces fought with everything they had, determined to protect their home and their future. It was a battle of survival, a fight against overwhelming odds. But despite the Union's technological superiority, they had underestimated the will of the Tovari, and they had underestimated humanity. As the battle reached its climax, a massive explosion erupted in the sky. The Endurance, with its heavy firepower, had breached the Union's command ship, the Indomitable. With a final, thunderous blast, the ship was destroyed, sending shockwaves through the Union fleet. Without their leader, the remaining Union ships began to retreat, fleeing back into the void of space. The Tovari and humans stood victorious. On the ground, the survivors began to cheer. They had done it. Against all odds, they had fought back the might of the Galactic Union. The Tovari had shown the galaxy that they were not weak. They were not to be discarded or forgotten. And with humanity by their side, they had proven that when two races stand together, there is nothing they cannot overcome. Captain Voss stood with Lyra and the Tovari leaders, watching the Union ships retreat into the distance. Tovar Prime had been saved, but more importantly, a new chapter had begun. A chapter of unity, hope, and strength. Together, they had forged a new future, a future where the Tovari and humans would stand side by side, never again to be shunned by the galaxy.